Hello, I'm Jenny Woodward and welcome to the Weather Quarter, the show that looks at the weather and how it impacts on the world we live in. This time we're heading to beef country. That's Rockhampton near the central Queensland coast. Thousands have gathered for the biggest beef expo in the southern hemisphere, and the weather was perfect for this largely outdoor event that attracted people from across the world. The city eagerly anticipates the beef expo and its public spaces were in outstanding condition. I visited the 150-year-old Rockhampton Botanic Garden that has survived weathers of all kinds. Tom Wyatt knows every nook and cranny of the Rockhampton Botanic Gardens, and it's easy to see his pride and love for the place where he spent 35 years as curator. He also understands the local climate.
We have a very hot, dry climate, and sometimes we can go 10 and 15 years in droughts. Like there's been droughts in 1913 that impacted here, 1926, the 1970s were all severe periods of drought. But in the very early years, like in the early 1900s, you can imagine how difficult it must have been, because it's been so lucky that it's had curators that were plantsmen and very enthusiastic plant collectors. And they'd have been watering with a horse and sulky and a 44-gallon drum and a bucket just to keep the valuable plant systems alive.
These gardens were established in 1869 by the Queensland Acclimatisation Society. As the name suggests, the aim of the gardens was to discover which plants were suitable for the weather and environmental conditions in the region. It was a program that was rolled out across the state.
They identified the areas around Toowoomba, Maryborough, Rockhampton, Charters Towers and Cooktown. And they played that role of funding and supporting the cultivation of economic crops, like cotton was grown here in this gardens to see if it would grow here. Then there was all the grains, and then there was all the fruits and the tropical fruits, all started here in this region. So it was part of the colonial government system of the day.
These societies weren't restricted to Queensland. There were similar groups working across the new colonies. As knowledge was acquired and commercial crops planted, the societies were gradually abandoned. But here in Rockhampton, there are still plantings dating back to that time of research and development in weather and climate.
Central Queensland has a hot, dry, or prolonged dry climate, and this area here was close to natural water and natural springs and well drained, so that was the area of the research.
In a hot, dry city like Rockhampton, trees play a valuable role in providing a cool retreat on a hot day.
They are all their own microclimate. If you're going to cool a place, and a place like Rockhampton needs cooling, and the only way to cool it is to use what I call natural air conditioners, and that's the foliage or canopies of trees. Today you walk through there, it was probably low humidity, cool, but very pleasant. And in summer it's very pleasant because of the high humidity, and the transpiration from the foliage cools the air, and that's why it's such a beautiful, popular place.
Over the years, the garden has grown and developed and has plant specimens from across the world.
It plays an important role as an educational resource, not just for Rockhampton but for the whole of the central Queensland region, because where can people go to find out what plants can be successfully cultivated throughout the region?
Remarkably, the garden has only had 6 curators in its long history. Looking at it today, it's hard to imagine it's endured heat, drought, wind and storms. A garden for all weathers, just as the original planners imagined. And remarkably, the zoo that was established with the garden survives as well. It houses a collection of native animals, along with some chimpanzees and other apes. It's open every day and admission is free. The Rockhampton gathering brings together many different kinds of people, but they all have one thing in common. They're committed to the future of the beef industry far and wide. Paula Heelan is a freelance reporter and photographer who lives with her husband on a cattle station. She took out some time to explain to the Weather Quarter how meteorological matters impact beef producers.
I'm Paula Heelan. I live on a cattle property an hour and a half northeast of Clermont in central Queensland. It's about 6 hours west of Rockhampton. We breed and raise Droughtmaster cattle for the domestic market, and we raise the cattle over about 20,000 acres. It's a family business, and pretty much our livelihoods depend on the weather. This year we had a very late wet season, so we were for months watching the weather, waiting and hoping for rain because it was such a long time coming. Even though we had a good season the year before, it was still very dry, and we were pumping water through the property. So it was a good time. When March came, it was a late wet season, but we got lots of rain in March. Essentially we have two seasons, a dry season and a wet season. If we get winter rain, that's just a bit of a bonus, that's really nice, but we expect to have very low rainfall in the wet season, in the dry season. Then in the wet season, from about November, we hope to start getting some rain, which can go through to March, April. And we've had some very wet seasons in the last few years, and for us it's been great. We've been on the edge of monsoon weather and on the edge of floods, which were further south. But for us it was just a great soaking, and the property really benefited from that. It was really beautiful rain. So if we get too much rain, we just know we'll get isolated, and that's fine, we expect that. It just means the creeks and rivers come up, and we could be caught on the property for a week, 2 weeks, it could go up to 6 weeks. If there's a bit of a break in the weather, the creeks will go down and we can get across the creeks and rush into town, get some supplies and rush back again. If it goes on for too long, somehow we'll get food into it. Someone might be getting across a creek, one person might go in for the whole area and bring out food for everyone. Might come down to a helicopter drop if it's too long. But we stock up well, make our own bread, have our own beef, have our own eggs. We often have to go without fresh food if it goes on too long, but generally there'll be a break in the weather. We can get out. If it rains, we could get stuck and not get back in, but generally we can get out and get back in. We've never had it so severe, the drought so severely that we've had to destock, but certainly we've had to lighten the load a lot because there's not enough water or feed. But then as soon as the wet season comes, the land there's a transition very quickly and the grass comes back very fast, so then we can build our numbers again. So we stock according to the weather and according to the availability of food and water. I grew up in Tasmania, so I find the Queensland, the hot weather, very hot and hard to take at times. It's very hot to work outside. But the winters are always a lovely time, nice mild temperature. And we don't get too much humidity, more a dry heat, but more humidity in the wet weather. But I enjoy the transition of seasons. It's all good.
The Beef Expo draws a huge crowd. More than 4,000 cattle were on display, but there were plenty of other exhibits to interest people on the land. The Bureau of Meteorology set up shop, and their staff were on hand to answer all the tricky questions.
We like to show the general public our products and services that are available on the web, and also just to promote what's happening weather-wise and also with the climate. And we also have people up from the hydrology section if people have any questions about flood warnings or any of the warnings that we put out. I think the most common question would be when is it going to rain? The agricultural sector's here, and they're very interested in the weather, being a weather-dependent industry. We do actually get quite a few school groups through, which is very good for us. We like to be able to educate the young kids that are coming through and let them know about the weather and how rain is formed and just general questions about weather. Yeah, we do find that people are very interested in the short-term forecast, with a 4 to 7 day forecast for rainfall and temperature. They're also interested in our seasonal outlooks, which goes out for 3 months, and it helps our agricultural sector plan. We do hand out quite a few brochures, particularly on clouds. We have a cloud chart which is quite popular with the kids because it lets them understand what type of clouds do actually form rainfall. You'll find a majority of people are very happy with our forecasts. The accuracy of our forecasts has increased somewhat, particularly over the last few decades. So we do get a lot of compliments for a job well done, and people can get to talk to us face to face. and get to know, who we are behind the Bureau.
While I was visiting the Bureau stand, I saw a brochure about an extraordinary weather event that occurred in 1965. And after a little investigation, I found out more in our ABC archives.
You're listening to the ABC from the second network. The time 7 o'clock.
The people of much of New South Wales are still feeling the effects of one of the worst winter days they've ever known. Howling winds, near record falls of snow, rain, hail and low temperatures. Mountain areas within 100 miles of Sydney have had their heaviest snow in more than 60 years. Residents of some places had never seen it there before. The city of Lithgow, on the western fringe of the Blue Mountains, seems to have borne the brunt of the cold blast. The snowfall there is said to be one of the heaviest this century. Most of Lithgow has been without electricity and telephone services for 24 hours, and domestic services, including newspaper and milk deliveries, have been stopped.
But that icy outburst wasn't confined to southern states. The snowfalls extended into Queensland, north of the Tropic of Capricorn, and up to Dalrymple Heights, northwest of Mackay. The weather chart for the day showed an intense low off the southern Queensland coast and another low in the southern Tasman. The snow covered about 90,000 square kilometres of the Sunshine State. There were reports of snow falling like soap flakes, and in some areas it melted as soon as it reached the ground, but there were drifts near Surat of up to 5 centimetres, which lasted for several hours. The Brisbane Weather Bureau Chief, Mr AJ Shields, was quoted as saying, "The situation is phenomenal." The event is well remembered, and Beryl Dyer, who lives near Alpha, took this snap of her late husband Vince and baby Michael, examining the white stuff. There were reports that water troughs froze solid, pipes burst and icicles grew on trees. A hotel reported an increase in rum sales with a slight drop-off in beer. Advertisers were quick to cash in on the unusual weather. And that's the show for this time. If you have a weather story or photo you'd like to share, contact me at weatherquarter@your.abc.net.au, and you can also find me on Twitter @JennyWeather. I'm Jenny Woodward. Bye for now.